The medical ship Sanctuary floated peacefully above the blue planet called Vareth Prime. Dr. Catherine Blake stood by the large window and watched the world below. She wore a white coat that everyone in the galaxy now knew meant help was coming. Her ship was one of 12 hospital vessels that humanity sent across the stars to heal the sick and wounded. They carried no weapons at all. They only brought medicine and hope. Lieutenant Alex Morrison sat at his station checking the ship's systems. He was young but experienced. He had flown this mission many times before. The crew of the Sanctuary were all volunteers. They chose to spend their lives helping others no matter what species they were. For 30 years, this had been humanity's gift to the galaxy. They asked for nothing in return. Catherine turned to face her medical team. The sickness on Vareth had already killed 3 million people. The bug-like aliens called Varathi had run out of medicine and doctors. They had no choice but to ask humanity for help. Catherine's team would go down to the planet and work day and night to save as many lives as they could. Commander Daniel Hayes walked up beside her. He was an old Navy captain who now commanded a hospital ship instead of a warship. He had seen enough fighting in his youth. Now he protected healers instead. His job was to keep the medical staff safe while they worked. For 3 decades, this had been easy. Everyone in the galaxy respected the medical ships. Even enemies stopped shooting when the white vessels arrived. It was an unwritten law that everyone followed. The Sanctuary dropped into the atmosphere of Vareth Prime. The team set up medical camps in the cities where the plague was worst. The Varathi people cried with joy when they saw the humans arrive. Their children were dying, and the human doctors worked without rest to save them. Catherine moved from patient to patient. Her hands were skilled and her heart was kind. This was why she became a doctor. This was what humanity did best. 3 days passed in a blur of work. Catherine was treating a young Varathi child when Lieutenant Morrison ran into the medical tent. His face was white with fear. He told her they needed to leave immediately. There was a fleet in orbit above them. Catherine asked what kind of fleet it was. Morrison's voice shook when he answered. 40 Krell warships had appeared in the sky. Catherine's hands stopped moving. The Krell Dominion was a military empire that hated the Varathi people. They had been fighting over territory for many years. But even the Krell would not attack a hospital ship. That was impossible. That was against every rule the galaxy had agreed upon. No one attacked healers. No one. Commander Hayes' voice came through the speakers in the tent. He said all personnel needed to prepare for emergency evacuation. The Krell fleet was charging their weapons. They demanded that the Sanctuary leave Varathi space immediately. Hayes had told them this was a humanitarian mission. He explained that they had patients who would die if moved. The Krell commander said he did not care. They had 10 minutes to leave. Catherine felt her heart freeze in her chest. The medical tent exploded into controlled chaos. Nurses and doctors tried to stabilize the patients who were too sick to move. Catherine worked faster than she ever had in her life. Her mind refused to believe what was happening. This could not be real. The galaxy had rules. Hospital ships were sacred. Everyone knew this. Everyone respected this. The 10 minutes went by like seconds. Catherine was carrying the young Varathi child toward the transport shuttles when the Sanctuary shook violently. The first plasma weapon had hit the ship's shields. Morrison shouted that they were firing on them. The impossible was happening. The Krell were attacking a hospital ship full of unarmed doctors and nurses. Catherine ran for the emergency escape pods with the child in her arms. Her team scattered around her, trying to reach safety. The Sanctuary's shields were designed to protect against space rocks and radiation. They were not built to stop military weapons. The shields failed within seconds. The second attack tore through the medical bay where Catherine had been working moments before. Equipment exploded. Supplies burned. People who had not made it to the pods died instantly. Catherine reached an escape pod and strapped herself and the child inside. Through the small window, she watched in horror as explosions rippled across the Sanctuary's hull. The beautiful white ship that had saved so many lives was being torn apart by weapons fire. Commander Hayes managed to send one final message before the bridge was destroyed. His voice was calm even as death came for him.
He said this was the hospital ship Sanctuary.
He said they were unarmed civilians on a medical mission. He said they were under attack by Krell forces. Then he said something that made Catherine's blood run cold. He told any human vessel that received his message to remember what happened here. The Sanctuary broke into pieces. Fire bloomed in the darkness of space. 217 medical personnel died in those moments. Doctors who had saved millions, nurses who had worked in war zones, volunteers who had chosen to help instead of hurt. They were murdered for their kindness. Catherine's escape pod tumbled through space. Its automatic distress beacon screamed into the void. She held the Varathi child close and watched the debris of her ship float past the window. Around the galaxy, 11 other Mercy Fleet vessels received the same treatment over the next 2 days. The Krell Dominion had decided that killing humanity's medical presence would make the Galactic Council weak. They thought no one would stop them from expanding their empire if the healers were gone. They had made a terrible mistake. They had attacked the one thing humanity valued above all else. They had killed the gentlest souls that Earth had to offer. They had murdered people who carried no weapons and threatened no one. The Krell thought this would make humanity afraid. They thought humans would retreat and hide. They did not understand what they had actually done. They had reminded humanity of something it had tried very hard to forget. Before humans sent healers across the galaxy, they had spent 10,000 years perfecting a different skill. They had become very good at war. They had learned every possible way to fight and kill and destroy. They had only stopped because they chose to, because they wanted to be better, because they hoped the galaxy would let them be healers instead of warriors. The Krell had just taken that choice away. The Galactic Council chamber descended into chaos within minutes of the emergency session beginning. Representatives from 24 different species shouted at each other across the Grand Hall. Arguments and accusations flew back and forth like weapons. In the middle of all this noise sat Ambassador Marcus Webb from Earth. He said nothing. He just sat there in cold silence while everyone else panicked. Counselor Thelian was a creature with tentacles that waved frantically as he spoke. He said this was terrible, but they had to respond with diplomacy. He insisted that military action would only cause more death. Other counselors nodded and agreed. They wanted to write stern letters and file official complaints. They wanted to have more meetings and more discussions. Marcus finally stood up. His voice cut through the noise like a knife through paper. He asked if they had said diplomatic. His face looked like it was carved from stone. He reminded them that the Krell had murdered unarmed doctors. They had destroyed hospital ships. They had killed healers who were trying to save lives. Counselor Vren from the Torth Assembly tried to sound understanding. He said they knew Marcus was angry, but humanity must not overreact. Several other counselors made sounds of agreement. They seemed more worried about humanity's response than about the murdered medical workers. Marcus looked around the chamber slowly. He said that for 30 years humanity had sent its best people to heal the wounded across the galaxy. They had asked for nothing in return. They had saved millions of lives from plagues and injuries and wars that humans had no part in, and now the Council dared to tell them not to overreact when their people were murdered in cold blood. The chamber went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the floor. Marcus continued speaking, but his voice got quieter and more dangerous. He explained that the people who crewed those hospital ships were volunteers. They were poets and dreamers and the most compassionate souls that humanity had. The Krell had just killed the best of what humanity could offer. He paused to let that information sink into everyone's minds. Then he said something that made several counselors shift uncomfortably in their seats. He reminded them that before humanity sent healers across the galaxy, they had spent 10,000 years perfecting a different art. Humans had become very good at war. The only reason the Council had not seen that side of humanity was because humans chose to leave it behind. Counselor Thelian spoke carefully, like he was afraid of what Marcus might say next. He asked if humanity was really suggesting what he thought they were suggesting. Marcus interrupted him. He said he was not suggesting anything at all. He was informing them of facts. The Mercy Fleet was suspended indefinitely. He had been instructed to deliver a message to the Krell Dominion from the United Earth government. Marcus pulled out a small chip and inserted it into the Council's communication system. A hologram appeared showing President Linda Martinez sitting at her desk. Her face wore an expression that humanity had not shown in public for 3 decades. It was the look of someone who had decided that being kind was no longer working. President Martinez addressed the Krell Dominion directly. She said they had committed an act of war against Earth. They had murdered 2,643 unarmed medical workers who were protected by the Galactic Accords. They had violated every principle of civilized warfare. Her voice was steady but cold as ice. She leaned forward in her chair. She said that humanity had given the Krell the gift of mercy. They had responded with slaughter. Very well. Humanity had tried to show everyone who they wanted to be. Now the Krell would learn who humans were before, and what they were still capable of becoming when forced. The hologram changed to show footage from Earth's military history. Battles and wars from thousands of years flashed across the screen. Weapons and tactics and strategies that had been refined over millennia of human conflict. The council members shifted uncomfortably as they watched. Many of them had never seen this side of humanity before. They had only known the healers and helpers. President Martinez gave the Krell 72 hours to surrender unconditionally. Every member of their military command who had ordered or executed attacks on medical vessels would stand trial for war crimes. Their government would pay money to the families of everyone they killed, and they would never threaten a hospital ship again. A Krell commander's voice crackled through the communication channel. His tone was full of arrogance and pride. He asked what would happen if they refused to surrender. President Martinez smiled, but there was no warmth in it at all. It was the smile of a predator. She said that humanity would remind the galaxy why they had spent 10,000 years fighting each other for practice. The Krell wanted to see what happened when you attacked human healers. They were about to meet the wolves that humanity kept chained beneath sheep's clothing. The transmission ended abruptly. Marcus looked around the council chamber at all the shocked faces. He told them his government had authorized the deployment of something called the Reaper Corps. He suggested that all neutral parties should clear their vessels from the border zones. Things were about to become very messy very quickly. Counselor Vren asked what the Reaper Corps was. His voice trembled slightly. Marcus picked up his documents and prepared to leave. He explained that it was something humanity had built in secret 30 years ago. They had hoped to never use it. It was a fail-safe measure, a reminder. Insurance against a galaxy that might one day mistake human kindness for weakness. Thelian protested that this was madness. He said humanity would destabilize the entire sector. Marcus stopped at the door and turned back. He said the Krell had destabilized everything when they fired on the sanctuary. Humanity was just responding appropriately. He told them one more thing before leaving. He advised the council to tell their people to watch the news feeds. In 72 hours, if the Krell had not surrendered, the galaxy was going to remember what happened when humanity stopped pretending to be civilized. Marcus left the chamber. His communicator buzzed with a message from Earth Military Command. It was short and simple. It said the Reapers were waking up. It ended with the words, "God help us all." Deep beneath the mountains of Colorado on Earth, there was a classified facility that had not been used in decades. General Patricia Cole walked through corridors that had been sealed and empty for 30 years. Behind heavy doors, soldiers were being woken from cryogenic suspension. These were not the volunteers who crewed hospital ships. These were veterans of humanity's worst conflicts. Warriors who had been preserved and saved for one specific purpose. They would only be unleashed if anyone ever made humanity regret choosing peace over war. Patricia stopped in front of a large window. Behind the glass stood rows and rows of combat armor. Each suit was painted black and crimson. They were works of art in a terrible way. They had not been designed for peacekeeping or exploration. They had been designed for absolute and total warfare. Captain Ryan Foster was the first to fully wake from suspension. His eyes focused on Patricia through the glass. He asked if they were really doing this. His voice was rough from decades of sleep. Patricia nodded slowly. She told him the Krell had attacked the Mercy Fleet. They had killed over 2,000 medical personnel. Ryan's expression turned hard as stone. Every Reaper had volunteered for this program, knowing they would only wake if humanity's compassion was met with atrocity. They were the insurance policy. They were the dark promise. The message was simple. Hurt our healers and face our killers. Ryan asked how many Reapers they were deploying. Patricia told him all of them. 5,000 Reapers would be sent to remind the Krell what human warfare really looked like. Ryan turned to address his team. His voice carried through the facility and reached every warrior who was waking from their long sleep. He told them this was what they had trained for. The Krell had killed human doctors and nurses and medics, people who never carried weapons, people who saved lives across the galaxy. Now those murderers would learn a hard lesson. Humanity's healers were a privilege. Humanity's warriors were a consequence. The 72-hour deadline expired with the Krell Dominion's mocking response broadcast across every channel. They called humanity's threats empty words. They declared they would continue purging what they called soft influences from their territory. They laughed at the idea that humans could challenge their military might. They had made their choice and sealed their fate. At exactly 0600 hours Galactic Standard Time, 3 human fleets materialized at the edge of Krell space. These were not exploration vessels or cargo ships. These were warships built with every lesson humanity had learned from 10,000 years of killing each other, enhanced with technology developed in secret over 3 decades. Technology the galaxy had never seen because humanity never wanted to use it. The warship Vengeance led the assault fleet. Its black hull was marked with a single red cross painted over a broken shield. This was the symbol of the Reaper Corps, a reminder of what they were protecting and what had been destroyed. Admiral Gregory Kane stood on the bridge watching the tactical display light up with enemy signatures. 500 Krell warships moved to intercept the human fleet. The Krell commanders were confident in their superior numbers. They thought this would be an easy victory. They were wrong. Kane broadcast to all human ships. He told them to remember what they were fighting for. Every life the Krell had taken. Every healer they had murdered. He ordered them to make the Krell regret, teaching humanity that kindness was weakness. He gave the command to execute Operation Righteous Fury. The human fleet split into 3 separate formations. They moved with perfect coordination that surprised the Krell commanders. The Krell were used to fighting enemies who relied on honor and tradition. They used straightforward tactics that were predictable. Humanity had abandoned honor the moment the Krell killed unarmed doctors. Lieutenant Sophie Grant piloted one of the new Wraith-class fighters. Her ship was small and fast and nearly invisible to Krell sensors. Behind her flew 200 similar craft. They wove through the enemy formation like ghosts in the darkness. The Krell could not track them. They could not target them. They could barely see them. Sophie's squadron leader gave the order to target communication arrays first. They needed to blind the enemy before the main assault began. Sophie's fingers moved across her controls with practiced precision. She painted targets with her ship's laser systems. Missiles launched from the Vengeance streaking through space with terrifying accuracy. Krell communication towers exploded in sequence one after another. Their ships were suddenly isolated and confused. They could not coordinate their defense. Admiral Kane announced that Reapers were clear for deployment. This was the moment that would change how the galaxy understood warfare forever. 5,000 drop pods launched from the human fleet. Each pod contained a Reaper in full combat armor. They did not target military installations or strategic positions. They headed straight for the Krell command ships, the vessels whose officers had given the orders to attack the Mercy fleet. Captain Ryan Foster's pod hit the hull of the Krell dreadnought Dominance with tremendous force. Cutting lasers activated automatically and burned through the reinforced plating like it was paper. Within seconds, Ryan and his team were inside the enemy vessel. The Krell soldiers inside never stood a chance against what came next. Ryan moved through the corridors like death itself had taken physical form. His armor's enhanced strength let him tear through bulkheads and enemies alike. His weapons were precise and efficient and absolutely merciless. Every Krell officer who had been present during the attack on the Mercy fleet had been marked. The Reapers had their names and faces and locations. They knew exactly who they were hunting. Ryan announced over his team channel that he had acquired his target. He cornered Commander Jarn in the ship's command center. The Krell officer who had personally ordered the firing on the sanctuary backed against a wall. His insect-like body trembled with fear he had never felt before. Jarn tried to argue that this was illegal. He said they were a recognized government. He insisted there were rules of war that protected him. Ryan's voice was cold and empty of emotion. He told Jarn that he should have remembered those rules before murdering human medics. The trial lasted 30 seconds. The execution was even faster. Across 24 Krell command ships, similar scenes played out. The Reapers were not there to conquer territory or occupy planets. They were there to deliver justice with surgical precision. Every officer who had participated in the attacks on the Mercy fleet was identified and captured or eliminated. There was no escape. There was no mercy. There was only consequence. Meanwhile, in space, the battle raged with intensity the galaxy had rarely witnessed. The Krell had superior numbers, but humanity had innovation born from desperate necessity. Human ships used tactics that no one had seen before. Electronic warfare crippled enemy systems. Kinetic weapons struck from unexpected angles. And most devastating of all were weapons designed specifically to counter the Krell's biological advantages. The Krell were insect-like beings who relied heavily on pheromone communication between their crew members. Humanity had developed a chemical compound that disrupted this completely. They introduced it into Krell ship atmospheres. Within minutes, the crews became disorganized and panicked. They could not communicate. They could not coordinate. Some ships began firing on each other in their confusion. Lieutenant Grant reported that Krell ships were breaking formation. Their neat military arrangement dissolved into chaos. Admiral Kane watched without expression. He gave the order to continue the assault. No mercy for those who had shown none to human healers. But humanity was not interested in genocide or complete destruction. They were interested in justice and ensuring this never happened again. As Krell ships fell or retreated in disarray, human vessels broadcast a single message across all frequencies. Surrender now and be treated as prisoners of war under the Galactic Accords. Continue fighting and face the full force of what the Krell commanders had condemned them to by attacking healers. Some Krell ships chose to surrender. Those vessels were boarded by human Marines who, despite everything, treated the prisoners with dignity. They even provided medical care to the wounded. Others chose to fight until the end. Those ships were destroyed with clinical efficiency. That was almost surgical in its precision. By the time the 72nd hour became the 73rd hour, the Krell Dominion had lost 60% of its military fleet. More importantly, they had lost every single officer who had been involved in the attacks on the Mercy fleet. The Reapers had delivered their message written in fire and justice and blood. Captain Ryan Foster stood on the bridge of the captured Krell flagship. He looked out at the debris field that had once been the pride of the Dominion's military. His armor was scorched and damaged from the fighting, but his eyes were clear and focused. He opened a secure channel to General Cole on Earth. He reported that primary objectives were complete. All war criminals had been apprehended or neutralized. He requested permission to return to base. Patricia's voice came back through the channel. She said permission was granted. She told him well done. Then she said now came the hard part. Ryan asked what that was. Patricia paused before answering. She said the hard part was remembering how to be human again after doing what needed to be done, after killing even for righteous reasons, after becoming the monsters they hunted. Ryan looked at his team. Warriors who had done terrible things for good reasons. They would carry these actions for the rest of their lives. The weight would never fully leave them, but neither would the memory of the 2,643 healers who had died simply for trying to save lives. Ryan told the general they would manage. They always did. That was what Reapers were for. To carry the burden so others did not have to. To do the dark work so the healers could continue healing. To be the wolves so the sheep could remain gentle. The first battle of the Krell War was over. The Krell Dominion lay broken and defeated. Their military was shattered. Their commanders were dead or captured. Their arrogance had been crushed beneath the weight of humanity's response. They had thought humans were weak and soft. They had learned the hard way that humans were warriors who had chosen peace, and that choice could be unmade when necessary. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as news of the battle spread. Humanity had revealed itself in a way no one expected. They were not the gentle healers everyone thought they knew. Or rather, they were still healers, but they were also something far more dangerous. They were both. Compassionate enough to save lives across the stars, violent enough to destroy anyone who tried to stop them. The aftermath of what became known as the Krell War sent shockwaves throughout the Galactic Council that would last for years. The 3-day campaign had resulted in the near-total collapse of the Krell Dominion's military power. Their entire command structure had been captured or killed, but humanity had paid a price that could not be measured in casualty. Reports or military statistics, Dr. Catherine Blake stood in the memorial hall on Earth. She was one of the few survivors of the sanctuary's destruction. The walls around her were lined with holographic images of the fallen. Each face was accompanied by their name and the ship they had served on. 2,643 faces stared back at her. 2,643 people who had died for trying to help others. Catherine whispered to the empty hall that they had saved over 4 million lives. And they had been killed for it. Her voice cracked with emotion. Ambassador Marcus Webb approached from behind. His footsteps echoed in the vast chamber. He told her the Galactic Council wanted to meet with her. They were calling for humanity to stand down and deactivate the Reaper Core immediately. Catherine turned to face him. Her eyes were red from crying. She said of course they were calling for that. Now that humanity had done the ugly work of reminding everyone that actions have consequences, they wanted humans to pretend they were still the gentle healers, the ones who smiled and accepted that sometimes monsters won and there was nothing you could do about it. Marcus nodded slowly. He understood her anger. He asked her a difficult question. Did she think it was worth it? Did unleashing the Reapers honor the memory of the fallen? Or did it just prove that humanity was no better than the Krell? It was the question that haunted every human who had watched the war unfold. The question that kept Ryan Foster and his Reapers awake at night despite their victory. The question that had no easy answer. Marcus took a long breath before answering his own question. He said that humanity had always walked a knife edge between compassion and wrath. They sent healers because they believed in mercy. They sent warriors because someone had to defend those healers. The galaxy wanted humans to choose one or the other. They were uncomfortable that humanity was capable of both. He gestured to the holographic faces surrounding them. These people did not die because they were weak. They died because they were strong enough to be vulnerable, brave enough to enter war zones with medicine instead of guns. The Reapers did not dishonor their memory. They ensured it would never happen again. Catherine wiped her eyes. She said the Council thought humanity had become monsters. Marcus corrected her. He said the Council was scared. For 30 years they thought they knew humanity. Humans were the healers and mediators, the soft power that helped everyone without asking for anything in return. Then the Krell revealed what happened when you mistook kindness for weakness. Now the galaxy was terrified that humanity might not be who they thought. Catherine asked quietly if they were monsters now. Marcus smiled sadly. He said humanity was exactly who they had always been. Humans, capable of extraordinary compassion and terrible violence. Often the violence was in defense of the compassion. The galaxy had just forgotten that one trait did not exclude the other. In Geneva, President Linda Martinez sat across from the Krell Dominion's new provisional leader. His name was Minister Velak. He was young for a Krell. His carapace still showed bright colors instead of the dark shades that came with age. His previous government had been completely destroyed by the Reapers. Velak said his government wished to formally apologize. The previous regime's actions were war crimes. They accepted full responsibility and agreed to all terms of surrender. His voice through the translator sounded genuinely remorseful. Linda studied him carefully. She asked why the Krell fleet had attacked unarmed medical vessels. Velak's antennae drooped in a gesture that indicated shame in Krell body language. He explained that they had believed humans were weak. The Mercy Fleet saved millions of Krell enemies. The old guard thought eliminating human healers would make the Galactic Council lose its moral center. They thought humanity would accept it and file diplomatic protests and eventually forgive. Linda said they were wrong. Velak agreed immediately. He said they were catastrophically wrong. They did not understand that humans were not pacifists. Humans were warriors who chose peace. There was a profound difference between the two. Linda leaned back in her chair. She told Velak what was going to happen next. His government would pay reparations to the families of every person killed in the attacks. They would surrender every individual involved in planning or executing those attacks for trial at the Galactic Court, and they would broadcast across every channel in the Dominion a full acknowledgement of what they did and why it was wrong. Velak agreed immediately to all terms. Linda held up her hand. She said she was not finished yet. The Mercy Fleet would resume operations within 6 months, and if any species ever attacked a medical vessel again, the Reaper Corps would make what happened to the Krell fleet look like a gentle warning. Velak's eyes widened with something close to genuine fear. He asked if humanity was not disbanding the Reapers. Linda said no. They had built the Reaper Corps as a fail-safe measure, a guarantee, a promise. Attack human healers and face human killers. That equation did not change because it made people uncomfortable. It existed precisely because some people needed to be made uncomfortable. Velak warned that the Galactic Council would oppose keeping the Reapers active. Linda smiled without any humor. She told him to let the Council try. Humanity had tried playing by their rules. They sent their best people to save lives. Those people were murdered because humanity was not scary enough to deter monsters. That would never happen again. She stood indicating the meeting was over. She told Valak to go home. Rebuild his government into something that remembered this lesson, and pray that humanity never had to teach it again. After Valak left, Linda's chief of staff entered the office. He informed her that the council was threatening economic sanctions if humanity did not decommission the Reaper Corps. Linda walked to her window and looked out over Geneva. She told him to let them try. They would realize quickly that humanity provided 60% of medical expertise and 40% of scientific research and 30% of trade infrastructure in this sector. Humanity did not need the council more than the council needed humanity. The chief of staff noted quietly that some people were calling humans tyrants now. Linda replied that some people had called humans doormats when they sent unarmed doctors into war zones. The galaxy was full of opinions. What mattered was that no one would ever again think they could kill human people without facing consequences. She turned back to face her aide. She told him to schedule a broadcast. It was time for humanity to explain to everyone what the Reaper Corps really was and why it was not going anywhere. The galaxy needed to understand the new reality. Humanity's mercy was still available, but it was no longer unconditional. It was no longer undefended. It was no longer free from consequences if you tried to destroy it. The message was simple and clear. Humanity would continue to heal the sick and help the needy. They would continue to be the compassionate species that had earned respect across the stars. But they would do so under the protection of forces that ensured their healers could work without fear. The Reapers were not a threat to peace. They were a guarantee that those who broke peace by attacking the defenseless would face overwhelming retaliation. Some species complained that this made humanity seem aggressive. Linda's response was broadcast across every channel. She said humanity was aggressive, aggressively protective of their healers, aggressively opposed to war crimes, aggressively committed to ensuring that compassion was defended by force when necessary. If that made others uncomfortable, then perhaps they should examine why they were more bothered by the defenders than they had been by the murderers. The galaxy had a choice to make. They could accept the new reality that humanity was both healer and warrior, both compassionate and capable of violence, both merciful and willing to deliver justice. Or they could continue to complain while humanity did what it had always done, help those in need while defending the right to do so. Most species chose acceptance. They had seen what happened to the Krell. They understood the message. A few continued to protest, but their voices grew quieter as time passed. The Reaper Corps remained active. The Mercy Fleet prepared to resume operations, and humanity settled into its new role as the galaxy's protected protectors. The species that saved lives but would kill to defend those who saved. 6 months after the Krell War ended, Dr. Catherine Blake stood once again on the bridge of a hospital ship. This one was called the Covenant. The name had been chosen deliberately to represent humanity's renewed commitment to healing and protection. But everything was different now in ways both visible and invisible. Lieutenant Sophie Grant reported from the tactical station that the defense grid was online. The young pilot had transferred from fighter combat to medical ship protection after the war. She brought her combat skills to safeguard what she described as the people worth protecting. Her station on the Covenant was not for navigation. It was for weapons and defense. Catherine watched the status, displays showing not just medical equipment, but also defensive shields, and point defense systems, and a small group of Wraith fighters docked in the hangar bay. The Covenant was not armed to attack anyone, but it could defend itself if necessary. More importantly, it was never alone anymore. Sophie continued her report. The escort vessels Guardian and Sentinel were reporting ready status. They had full Reaper coverage for this mission. Catherine nodded and watched the 2 destroyers flanking her hospital ship on the tactical display. Humanity had learned its lesson in the cruelest way possible. Healers would still go into danger zones, but never again would they go unprotected. Catherine gave the order to take them to the Torth system. The alien species there had requested medical assistance with a radiation poisoning outbreak. She told Sophie it was time to show them that humanity's mercy was not dead. It was just better defended now. The Covenant jumped to hyperspace with its armed escorts close behind. As they traveled, Catherine reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. The Mercy Fleet was being rebuilt with new ships and new volunteers, people just as brave as those who had died. But now they operated under the permanent protection of the Reaper Corps, warriors who had proven beyond any doubt that humanity would not accept the murder of healers ever again. In the Colorado facility, Captain Ryan Foster trained the next generation of Reapers. His students were different from the original 5,000 warriors. Those first Reapers had been preserved in cryogenic suspension. They were relics of humanity's violent past who had been kept frozen in case they were ever needed. These new recruits were volunteers from the modern era, people who understood both humanity's compassion and its capacity for justified violence. Ryan told the assembled trainees to remember something important. They existed so that healers could do their work. Every mission they undertook and every action they took was in service of protecting those who saved lives. They were not conquerors. They were not soldiers of expansion or empire. They were guardians and nothing more. A young recruit named Lieutenant Jake Morris raised his hand. He said that some people claimed the Reapers were too aggressive, that humanity had gone too far with the Krell. Ryan considered the question carefully before answering. It was a fair concern that deserved a thoughtful response. Ryan asked if anyone knew that after the Krell War ended, attacks on medical vessels across the galaxy had dropped to zero. For 6 months, not a single hospital ship had been fired upon. Not a single doctor had been killed in a war zone anywhere. That was because every warlord and dictator and aggressor now understood that humanity would respond with overwhelming force to protect healers. He paused to let that information sink into the minds of his students. He told them they had not gone too far. They had gone exactly as far as necessary to ensure it never happened again. That was the burden Reapers carried, the weight of being both compassionate and capable of violence. It was not comfortable, but it was real and necessary. At the Galactic Council, Ambassador Marcus Webb delivered humanity's annual report. The chamber was fuller than usual. Many species had sent observers to hear what humanity would say. There was tension in the air, uncertainty about what humans had become. Marcus began by acknowledging that the past year had been difficult. Humanity had lost over 2,000 of its finest citizens. They had unleashed military capabilities that many wished had never been developed. They had made the galaxy uncomfortable with the reminder that humanity was not domesticated, merely civilized by choice. He looked around the chamber at all the different species represented there. But he stood before them with certain facts that could not be denied. Medical attacks were down 100%. Humanitarian missions were operating in twice as many systems as before. The Mercy Fleet had saved 400,000 lives in the past 6 months alone, and they did so under the protection of forces that ensured they could work without fear. Counselor Thelian spoke up as expected. He said many species remained concerned about the Reaper Corps. Its existence felt like a threat to galactic peace. Marcus met his gaze steadily. He said the Reaper Corps was not a threat to peace. It was a guarantee that those who broke peace by attacking the defenseless would face consequences. There was a significant difference. Another counselor added that some species thought the Reapers made humanity seem aggressive. Marcus replied with complete honesty. He said humanity was aggressive, aggressively protective of healers, aggressively opposed to war crimes, aggressively committed to ensuring that compassion was defended by force when necessary. If that made others uncomfortable, then perhaps they should examine why they were more bothered by defenders than they had been by murderers. The chamber fell into an uncomfortable silence. Marcus softened his tone slightly. He said humanity did not want to be the galaxy's enforcers. They wanted to heal and explore and learn alongside everyone else. But they would not apologize for ensuring their people could do those things safely. The Reapers were not going anywhere because the threat they countered was not going anywhere. President Linda Martinez watched the council proceedings from Earth. She knew Marcus was delivering the message, exactly as they had discussed. The galaxy needed to understand that humanity had changed, not in values but in willingness to defend those values with force if necessary. Her communicator signaled an incoming message from Admiral Kane. He reported they had received a distress call from the Varathi system. Pirates were attacking a civilian convoy. Linda asked what the response time would be. Kane said the vengeance could reach them in 4 hours. Linda considered the situation briefly. The Verithi were the species that had been receiving treatment when the sanctuary was destroyed. Saving them now felt appropriate and right. She gave the order to send the vengeance but told Kane to engage with minimum necessary force. They were not there to conquer. They were there to protect. Kane acknowledged the order. He said the Reapers would show restraint. Linda smiled slightly at the phrase. Restraint backed by overwhelming capability was perhaps the best description of what humanity had become. They would help and heal and show mercy whenever possible, but they would never again be victims of their own kindness. The Covenant dropped out of hyperspace above the Torth homeworld. The radiation poisoning outbreak was severe. The Torth government had spent weeks debating whether to accept human help. The memory of the Reaper core efficiency had made many species nervous about allowing humans near their planets. But desperation eventually won out over fear. Catherine transported down to the surface with her medical team. She found hundreds of Torth citizens suffering from radiation exposure. Her team went to work immediately. They distributed treatments and set up decontamination units just like they always had. An elderly Torth physician approached Catherine hesitantly. He said they had feared humanity might refuse to help after what happened with the Krell. Catherine looked up from her patient. Her expression was gentle but firm. She told him they were healers. That fundamental truth did not change because some people had chosen to be murderers, but the escort ships would remain in orbit. And if anyone tried to do to them what the Krell had done, they would learn the same lesson. The Torth physician nodded slowly. He said the galaxy was adjusting to this new version of humanity. The species that saved lives but would kill to protect those who saved. Catherine corrected him softly. She said humanity was not new. They had always been both. They had just hoped they would never have to prove it. The Krell took that hope away. Now everyone had to live with the reality. She returned to her work. She administered treatments with the same care and compassion she had always shown. Above the planet, the Guardian and Sentinel held position. Their weapons systems were active but not deployed. Ready but not eager. Prepared but not aggressive unless forced to be. It was a new balance that the galaxy was still learning to understand. Humanity's healers continued their work across the stars. But now they operated under the shadow of humanity's warriors. The shadow was not a threat to the innocent. It was a promise to the guilty. Across the galaxy, from the smallest pirate gang to the largest military empire, the message was received and clearly understood. Humanity's mercy was a gift and not a weakness. Attack those who gave the gift and face the consequences. The consequences were swift and terrible and absolute. The Reaper Corps stood ready, not eager for war but absolutely prepared for it if necessary. They were humanity's reminder to the galaxy that compassion backed by strength was the only mercy that could survive in an imperfect universe.